So, a few days ago, President Trump drops this social media post and it just sends these ripples through the political world. But here's the thing. What if the real story, the one that pretty much every major news outlet totally missed, had nothing to do with politics at all? I mean, at first glance, it just looks like a standard political job, right? But the analysis we're going to dig into today says that if you really want to get what's going on, you've got to look way past Parliament. You have to look right into the heart of global finance. And that really is the big question here. Was this just Trump taking a swipe at another politician? Or was it something much, much bigger, like a formal warning shot in a massive, high-stakes economic war? Okay, so first things first, let's start with the surface story. The conventional wisdom, what all the headlines were screaming about. And look, the media narrative was basically all on the same page. They framed this as President Trump just publicly humiliating the British leader, Keir Starmer, because he wouldn't join the U.S. in this recent military strike. Simple as that, a straight-up case of political payback. And here you have Starmer himself, giving his official reasons to Parliament. He's talking about, concerns over the legality of it all and whether it was really in the UK's national interest. Sounds pretty standard, right? Totally by the book. Okay, but this is where the analysis we're looking at starts to raise some eyebrows. It points out something pretty crucial. Britain has been America's go-to military partner for, over 100 years? They've been in pretty much every major conflict together. So why this sudden change of heart now? The source basically says, yeah, those official reasons, they just don't add up. All right, now let's bring in the second piece of this puzzle, because the source material tells us to look at the economic scene. Specifically, this really alarming spike in global oil prices that, get this, happened at the exact same time. So you've got two totally different stories trying to explain this chaos. On one hand, you have the official line, hey, there's a war in a key shipping region. Of course, there are going to be shortages and disruptions, and of course, prices will go up. Makes sense. But then, the source we're looking at claims something completely different. It says this was a manufactured panic. A crisis that was deliberately created to kneecap the president's economic agenda. And this is the key piece of evidence the source points to. The energy secretary himself, the guy in charge, goes on record and says flat out, there's no actual oil shortage. He said the problem wasn't a lack of supply. The problem was fear. Okay, so if there wasn't a real shortage, what the heck was going on? Well, the source lays out a very specific chain of events. It claims that Lloyd's of London, the insurance behemoth, pulled its war risk coverage for oil tankers in that area just hours after the conflict kicked off. And here's the kicker. If a tanker isn't insured, it doesn't sail, period. So the tankers just sit there, supply grinds to a halt, and boom, prices shoot through the roof. It's a crisis created not with a missile, but with a pen. And all of this leads us to the biggest piece of the whole theory, the role of the City of London. Because to really get the motive here, you have to understand the business model that, according to this analysis, is at the very center of everything. Right, so when we say the City of London, we're not just talking about a place on a map. The source defines it more like a massive financial ecosystem. And its power, it doesn't come from actually digging stuff out of the ground, like copper or oil. No, its power comes from controlling the paperwork around it, the insurance, the contracts, the futures markets. Basically, they get to set the rules for the whole game. And this is what this source calls the toll booth strategy, which is a pretty great way to put it. Think about it. By controlling these financial choke points, like insurance, they can basically just pull a lever whenever they want, create a crisis, and then they collect a fee, a toll, on pretty much all of global trade that has to pass through their system. And then the source adds another layer to this. It points to a statement from Chatham House, which it calls the city's public foreign policy arm. An expert there immediately came out and declared the U.S. military operation illegal. And this is presented as proof that all the city's institutions were moving together, in lockstep, to protect their financial interests. Okay, so let's pause. We've got this idea of an engineered crisis, and we have this theory about the city's business model. With all that in mind, let's circle all the way back to President Trump's post and see how it looks now. If this analysis is right, then this post suddenly isn't about Keir Starmer at all. That phrase, "we will remember," it just lands differently, doesn't it? It's not about remembering a political snub. It's about remembering a full-on financial attack. And that brings us to the ultimate and honestly pretty dramatic conclusion from the source. This wasn't just a tweet. It was a formal declaration. It was a notice being served to the financial powers that be in London, saying that the century-old special relationship, the one built on this partnership of money and military, is done. Over.
Which really just leaves us with this one kind of huge question. Could a single social media post actually signal the end of an alliance that's lasted 100 years? Well, according to this analysis, the message wasn't just sent, it was received, loud and clear.